Hello, everyone. What I'm going to do for the introductory anatomy portion of this course, I'm going to make a video for you. It's simply going to be me going through an outline, which is what I would do in class. These outlines are used to keep everybody on track, including myself. But where I am, this is week one under the tab here. And I'm going to go down. So here's there's some PowerPoints. There are some outlines. I'm going to go ahead and click on the one for introductory anatomy and physiology. Oh boy, yes. Now I'm going to make it big. So one of the reasons you study terminology at the beginning of a course like this is that you then use that terminology throughout the entire class. So it helps you. And these terms we're going to go over in this section, you're going to see them again. It's good to know body regions and things like that of that nature. So, and you are going to be tested on these things. So I'm going to go through it with you. So I'm going to start here first. Now, just as an introduction, the term anatomy means referring to a body part. Now, like it says here, deals with structures of the human body, muscle, tissue, bone, nerve. Gross anatomy are just overall structures, so that's kind of where you start. Physiology is how everything works together. How do all these organs, muscles, body parts, how do they coordinate with each other to maintain what is called homeostasis? So that's what physiology refers to. So study of the function of the body or how body parts work together. Now, under levels, look, some of this I'm going to go through with you and then, well, I'll go through all of it with you. But developmental anatomy is basically, what occurs between conception and adulthood. Now, that's not something we really deal a lot with. We deal more with things like this. Embryology is the study of the embryos in a certain time period. So cytology, we're actually going to cover this next week. And it covers cells, cell parts. You know, you can actually take an entire course. It's called cell biology. 16 weeks of glorious studying organelles, cell function, genetics, all kinds of different things. Histology, also an entire 16-week course. We are going to do this as well. That's the study of tissues. A tissue is a group of cells that have a common function. And then gross anatomy, more so do that maybe in lab, some lecture material, but you're talking about entire structures without the aid of a microscope, muscles, bones, nerves, things of that nature. Surface anatomy, and then there are different kinds of what's called anatomical imaging, radiographs, ultrasound, MRIs, all that kind of thing. Cell physiology, we will cover this, how all the little parts of a cell work together to keep it alive. Systemic means body-wide, so you're talking about physiology of organ systems, which we'll cover that as well. And neurophysiology, which deals with nervous systems. So we actually will go through all of this. If you take the second half of anatomy, we cover cardiovascular, hormones, digestion, urinary, entire organ systems. All right. You are going to have to be able to pick out what's called the levels of organization. Pick out the correct order. How do you build a person starting with subatomic particles? So I will be going off of this particular outline, but let me go down here. I have a picture for this. So here's the list. You start with subatomic particles, electrons, protons, and then you end up with an entire organism. So the levels of organization. So starting here, subatomic particles are protons, electrons. We're actually going to cover this in lecture. An atom, which is the smallest unit of an element. It's actually made of protons and neutrons and electrons. A molecule would be atoms joined together to make a bigger compound. Macromolecules are actually larger molecules, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, nucleic acids. Whoops. And anyway, when you get enough of those together, you can build what are called organelles. Organelles are like little organs for a cell, and they help keep a cell alive, allow it to do its functions. If you get a group of cells together, you can make what are called tissues. Tissues are groups of cells that have a very similar function. That's histology. This would be cytology along with organelles. If you get enough tissues together, you can build an entire organ. This happens to be a stomach. Here you have an organ system, and then yes, eventually you will build a big giant naked man or woman. But yeah, organ systems: heart, lungs, digestion, urinary, lymphatic, reproductive. All those are organ systems. So you're going to have to be able to pick out the correct order that this goes in. In other words, macromolecules are not going to be found between the cell and the tissue. That's not the correct order for things. You have to build everything up, and you can go the other direction as well. You can take an entire organism and break them down in what are called subatomic particles. Okay, I'm going to bounce back over to our outline. So this is just what I covered. Now, on the characteristics of living organisms, there are actually 7 of these, I believe. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, 7. A textbook we used in the past actually had 10. They have actually combined some of these, but what these are all, well, characteristics that all living organisms have in common. And I'm just going to touch on these and go through them with you. Here is cell composition. We kind of just went over that. All living organisms, multicellular, are made of individual cells. Metabolism is the rate in which your body is converting calories. Support life, carry out a wide variety of reactions. Growth is an increase in size without a change in shape. What that means, human beings, we're not disproportionate. Yes, everybody has a different body type, but your head is not disproportionate to your legs as you grow older. And the only time that might occur is when you're 2 years old and you have a jug head. Your head's a little bit bigger than your body, but that's because your brain is still growing. But or year and a half, 2 years old. But anyway, growth, that's just a characteristic that all organisms share. Excretion, toxic waste products, even bacteria. A byproduct of bacteria converting energy is, at times, depending on what kind it is either acid and gas, or in some cases ethanol. Just depends on what, all things have to excrete, what's the breakdown of chemical reactions. Responsiveness, reaction to a change inside or outside the body. That's the nervous system. If you didn't have a nervous system, you would not be able to react to anything, including your own organ function. Heart rate has to adjust when you're walking, and digestion adjusts to when after you've eaten food. So one characteristic that all things have is responsiveness. Movement, change in position of the body of a body part. Everything's got to be able to move. Even little microbes have to have some method of movement. If it's not using their own means, it's using the host that they're in, using either their blood flow or fluid flow. And reproduction doesn't necessarily mean offspring. It does mean production of new cells, but that's probably the most important one on the list. If there's no reproduction, you have no future generations or new cells. Cells get damaged and they have to be replaced. All right. What this is, there are 5 things that are considered to be requirements of life. I don't know if anything doesn't require water. But water is very important. Probably the biggest thing with human beings is this middle section. You do have to have it for your metabolic rate. It does influence body temperature. Very important. people can go a long time without eating, but can go a very short time without water, or cannot, well, just cannot go very long without water, depending on the environment. But might last 5 or 6 days without water. At that point, it start getting into serious health issues. Whereas food, you can go like a month without eating. You'd start seeing unicorns at some point, but yeah, you got to have food for energy. Oxygen, that probably should be on the top of the list if we're talking about needs. Human beings can go about 4 minutes without that, so that's probably the most important thing. But there are things on our planet that do not require oxygen. They're actually killed by oxygen. This is human anatomy and physiology, so yes, we do require oxygen. It's needed to convert energy or produce what is called ATP from cells. Okay, heat regulates rates of metabolic reactions. Yeah, body heat, body temperature, got to have a certain amount of that. And then pressure. You need pressure for breathing. We have to have pressure to get oxygen down in our lungs from the atmosphere. And you have to have a certain amount of blood pressure to circulate blood. All right, so these 5 things, and there is a review for each exam, but you got to have these things to sustain life. Okay, just a real quick overview. This is going into the actual body systems. So going to, my bad. Thought my PowerPoint had that. Skin is integument. Skeletal system, we will actually go over this. We'll go over the integumentary system as well. That's skin, all the accessory parts. The muscular system, muscles, how muscles contract, pretty detailed section. You got to have it for posture. Yes, they do produce heat. The nervous system, we'll cover that also in EMP1. Has to do with sensory nerves, motor nerves, reflexes, all kinds of different things. This is actually ANP2 material. The endocrine system is production of hormones and the glands that do that. Cardiovascular is your heart, heart, arteries, veins, blood circulation. The lymphatic system is immunity and returning excess blood back to from the tissues back to the bloodstream so you don't have swelling. The digestive system is, of course, it has to do with eating and how your body breaks down food. Respiratory is all about breathing and acquiring oxygen and getting that oxygen not only into your bloodstream but also into cells of the body. Urinary system, kidneys, ureters, bladder, urethra, all things like that. And then the reproductive system. The last thing we cover in AMP2, we cover both male, female reproductive parts. Don't really get detailed into as far as eggs and sperm and everything involved with how those are produced as far as genetics, but we do cover all those. Okay, you can't cover any biology course without talking about what is called homeostasis. Now, I believe this actually is it is. Here we go. That's a great picture. What homeostasis means is it's actually referring to maintaining a stable internal environment within an organism. No organisms can handle huge fluctuations in blood pressure, body temperature, organ function. You got to have something that's very steady state. It's called waxing and waning. It's slightly going up and down, but it's always staying within a range. So here's an example of homeostasis. So here we have a receptor that's going to react to a change. And at some point, and this could be like the brain, you have a control center that has a set point for that particular receptor. You're going to get some kind of a stimulus from the control center that's going to cause a reaction to either muscles or glands, and then that response will go back and remove the initial stimulus. This is called negative feedback. And just about everything in our body, from organ function to everything, has to do with negative feedback. Your body temperature is going to rise to a certain point, and then if something in your body was causing your temperature to rise that is not illness related, that mechanism will be shut off once your body temp reaches 98.6 degrees, if it had fallen down. So homeostasis is just maintaining a constant, stable environment. This is not a very, well, this picture is not very big. If you get a chance, you can look at it. It's actually giving an example of how the thermostat in your house works. When you have an air conditioner and you set your air conditioner at 70 degrees and it's in the summer and your temperature in your house goes above 70 degrees, the thermostat will kick on and the air conditioner will stay on until the temperature drops back down to 70 degrees, and then it will shut off. That's called negative feedback, and that's a lot of how homeostasis works. Keeps the body within a certain range. Negative feedback, I just kind of described that. That's where you have an initial stimulus, it causes a reaction, and then the reaction will actually go back and shut off the original stimulus. It's just it's a loop. There are certain things in your body you can't have too much of, and you got to have some kind of system, negative feedback system, that will shut it off at some point once it's reached to a certain level. Positive feedback, we don't talk much about that. Childbirth is an example of positive feedback where the mechanism never stops. Childbirth, once it starts, person goes into labor, it does not stop until the baby is born. So that's an example of positive feedback. A blood clot is another one. When your blood starts to clot, if everything's working correctly, you'll eventually will have a clot formed. It doesn't stop anywhere in between. All right, negative feedback, yes, does correct. Set point, well, keeps everything in a set point. Just the main thing it does, it's a constant loop, prevents over secretion, overactivity of glands and organs, keeps everything within a certain range. Yeah, body temp, blood pressure, glucose regulation, things like that. Okay, so I'm still in your outline. So here, I'm going to go back, and I might can make this one a little bit bigger. Let me see. Yeah, I might just, well, I can stay on this. I could probably make it a little bigger. So when you study introductory anatomy, you have to go over just basic body cavities, what are called directional terms, things like that. And a cavity is any filled space, well, any fluid-filled space within the body. Cavities are where organs are housed. And you actually can break the body down into two big cavities. You have what is called the dorsal body cavity, which is huge. And then you have the ventral. You know, dorsal refers to back, ventral refers to the front. And I wish that was on the other page, but within this larger cavity, look, on this particular example, you have two smaller cavities. The cranial cavity, which is located within the skull, that's up here. And then you have what's called the vertebral canal or vertebral cavity, which is this one that goes down the back like that. Here you find the spinal cord inside the brain. On the left over here is where you'd find the brain. You do need to know, like, for instance, what is found in the cranial cavity, which the brain's found there. What's found in the vertebral canal or cavity. That's the spinal cord. Now, the body cavity in the front, which is all of this here. Here you have the pleural cavities, and then this area with the blue here is supposed to represent an area called the mediastinum. It's not really a cavity, it's a region. It does kind of go down through this area, although it's showing it right here. It does house the heart. And anyway, well, the heart, esophagus, trachea, a lot of things. But here are the pleural cavities, the left and the right. Here's the pericardial cavity, which houses the heart. It's right in the center. And then all this up here is part of what is called the thoracic cavity, which the thoracic cavity is part of what is called the ventral body cavity. So it's big. This is a little bit larger but smaller than the ventral, and then within the thoracic you have these even smaller cavities. So you have to know like what is found there. What's found, here's the heart, left and right are the lungs, mediastinum, the area between the lungs. Like I said, you kind of have esophagus, trachea, heart, thymus gland, a lot of things there. The abdominal cavity, which is this whole thing here, that area that goes right between that is called the diaphragm. Well, I'm sorry, this whole thing's called the abdominal pelvic cavity. The abdominal cavity is this orange area. The red down here represents what's called the pelvic cavity. So here are all the major organs that are found within the abdominal cavity: stomach, liver, spleen, gallbladder, small large intestine, right and left kidneys. They're all found in that area. Appendix on the right side. Pelvic has the terminal end of the large intestine, the urinary bladder, and what are called the reproductive organs, which are down here. So left and right pleural cavities, pericardial cavity, mediastinum, abdominal cavity, and then here's the pelvic cavity. Now, this I think I actually do have a picture. Just real quickly, I'm going to touch on these. All these organs are held in place by what are called serous membranes. And these pictures are okay. In fact, I'm going to be going right off of the outline. So if you're watching this video, you can, I'm not going to cover something that's not part of your outline. So what are serous membranes? They are thin membranes. They actually have what is referred to kind of as an inside-outside layer. And between the two layers, they have what is called serous fluid. Serous fluid is like grease. It's kind of a slimy, I've been told it has the consistency of egg whites when you crack an egg open. But it's to prevent friction. You don't want the two membranes, the inside-outside, to be rubbing together. Now, we haven't gotten here yet, but there are two terms you need to memorize. Visceral refers to organ. Parietal refers to the cavity or the wall of a cavity that you find organs. So in your outline, I'll start with the, go in order. So here's the heart here. And I know that's not very big, but there's actually a video about this, but here's the outside layer. Goes around this way, and then on the inside is that little red layer there, and then you can kind of see this little space in between. The parietal pericardium would be the outer layer of the heart. Now the heart actually has 3 layers. We'll get to that later, but for right now, the parietal on this particular diagram is the outer layer. You can see it there. There's the parietal pericardium. The inside layer is called the visceral pericardium, and it sits right next to the heart, and it looks like saran wrap. It like wraps the heart up. And then the space between that is actually called, and we're talking about the serous membranes here, it's called the pericardial cavity in reference to these serous membranes. Yes, the cavity that I just covered with you, oops, too much caffeine. There we go. So here is, on this little different picture, there's the left and right pleural cavities, but there's the pericardial cavity that the heart sits in. This is talking about, like it says here, the space between the two serous membranes that surround the heart. And what you have in that space is called serous fluid. This down here on the bottom, these are the pleural membranes. This is called the parietal pleura, which is the outside layer that lines the wall of the cavity the lungs are sitting in. And then you have an inside layer called the visceral pleura. And then between that, yes, is called the pleural cavity. It's filled with serous fluid. It's there to prevent friction. keep the two membranes from rubbing together. What these are showing over here, this is the liver. It says organs. The major organs in the abdomen are surrounded by what are called the peritoneal membranes. Like right here it says parietal peritoneum. Here it says the visceral peritoneum, which is the inside layer, is kind of red colored. The blue represents the parietal peritoneum. Same thing. Between there you have the peritoneal cavity, which is filled with serous fluid. Membranes are there to keep all the organs in place because you do a lot of movement. You don't want your liver jumping up and down in your stomach. You don't want it moving around into your lungs. And so that's those membranes cover all the major organs. All right. So we're going to go through, there's some body systems for you. Here we go. Once again, I am still, there's the serous membranes. And then here we are, anatomical position. Got to give you a picture for that. When you cover anatomy terms, when you're answering questions, just remember, it's always referring to a person standing, and you are standing up in anatomical position. Standing erect, facing forward, upper limbs at the sides, and then palms facing forward and thumbs out. That is anatomical position. You have to know that definition. You got to know what, you have to know a description for it. And then what happens next is all these terms. And in fact, I'm going to go back here. These are called directional terms. So a structure which is higher than or above another. Superior, and like everybody you have, and we'll cover this later, you have what's called a superior vena cava. Big vein on top of the heart. So superior is a directional term. You need to know that. It's referring to a body part that's above or higher than another body part. Inferior is below. Anything referring to below a particular part of the body or a body part. Relating to the heart, you have a thing called the inferior vena cava, big vein on the bottom. Anterior, posterior, toward the front of the body. Posterior is toward the back of the body. Medial, lateral, and I'm going to go back up to, I'm going to go to our guy here. So, what medial does, medial refers to closest to the midline. Everybody has an imaginary midline that separates the body right down the middle. Now, we're not talking about cutting anybody or a plane. It's called an imaginary midline. Anything closer to the midline is considered medial. Anything further away from the midline is considered lateral. So here's the guy's thumb. You know, is the thumb medial or lateral to the pinky finger on the inside? And the answer to that question is the thumb is lateral because it's further away from the midline. The pinky, when you're standing in anatomical position, is actually medial to the thumb because it's closer to the midline. Big toes are medial. Pinky toes are lateral. The nose is medial. The ears are lateral because they're further away from the midline. Internal, external, referring to within the body. External being outside the body or a structure. Proximal, distal. These two can be a little confusing as far as what it's referring to. I'm going to go back to the big naked guy here. Proximal means, and I just got an email. Proximal means, closer to the trunk, and we're talking about the limbs here in this case. So anything proximal is closest to here. Anything that is distal is further away from the trunk, or what is called a point of attachment. So the way you're supposed to look at this, here are the knees, and then here's the feet. The knees are actually proximal to the feet. And why you say that? Because the knees are closer to where the legs attach to the trunk. The feet are distal to the knees. Why? Because distal means further away, further from the point of attachment. Elbows are proximal to the wrist. The wrists are distal to the elbows. Fingers are distal to the palm of the hand. The palm of the hand would be proximal to the fingers. A little tricky there. So central, peripheral. Central is talking about like the abdomen, center structure. Peripheral, outside of the central part of the body. We actually have what is called a central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, and then you have a peripheral nervous system, which are all the peripheral nerves toward the edges. And then we just went over these. Parietal, visceral. Parietal refers to the walls of a cavity. Visceral actually refers to organs. In fact, the major organs in the body, they're called the abdominal viscera, pelvic viscera, thoracic viscera, refers to organs. And then superficial and deep. Superficial is on the surface. You have muscles that are on top. You actually have muscles that are called deep. You'd have to cut through them to see them if you're dissecting something. So deep means further inward. And then these are just some last terms. Cranial pertains to head. Caudal is tail. Ventral dorsal mean the same thing as anterior posterior. Like we just did the ventral cavity, dorsal cavity a while ago. Dorsal's in the back, ventral's in the front. Now, these here, planes of section. I'm going to go down. Well, there's a great diagram here for midline, left, right, superior, inferior. These are, now, body section, well, planes are referring to, they're also imaginary, but you're not cutting, well, they're not imaginary, they're there. You're just not cutting somebody. Here's a pretty good diagram. So here's this person standing. See, she's standing in anatomical position. See the hands to the side, thumbs on the outside, pinkies on the inside, feet are forward. So if you look on your outline, there's a term called sagittal, and it's actually mid-sagittal. But this plane here that goes right down the center, see this one? It separates the body into left and right halves. It's called the sagittal plane or mid-sagittal plane. This one out here is actually called parasagittal. Don't really talk about that much. It's between an area on the outside between closer to medial and lateral. It's called parasagittal. Really don't cover that much. This under here, oops, is called the transverse or transverse plane. Separates the body into what is called superior, inferior, up and down. And then this one here is actually called the frontal or coronal plane. Separates the body into anterior, posterior. So those are common terms. Don't really see planes used a lot. I have seen them used in some exercise stuff, but so here's mid-sagittal, here's transverse, and that's representing the frontal or coronal. Okay, kind of getting to the end of our little anatomy tour of basic terms. I'm going to go, oops, there we go. So these are very common. If you work in the hospital, I don't know what you're going to be doing while you're taking this course, but if you're going to be a allied health person that's dealing directly with patients and patients' charts, you will see this in a patient's chart. So you have what is called the left and right hypochondriac regions. Well, first of all, these are called abdominal regions. They just refer to the abdomen. So it kind of goes down where the ribs are here, but you can see this little outline. So it goes all the way around like that. There's 9 of these. This is in your notes. See, here's the epigastric, and you have the duodenum, liver, stomach, pancreas, all found in that area. The left and right hypochondriac. Hypo means below. Chondro refers to cartilage. So you have the left and the right side there. Upper parts of the abdomen, that's the name for them. If you go to the doctor and you say, I have heartburn, they're going to put in your chart, you have epigastric pain. They're not going to put, you have upper tummy pain. Doesn't work that way. If you have pain up here in these areas, they're going to say pain in the left hypochondriac region. These are standardized terms. You have to have these so that physicians can have standard terminology, so there's no confusion. There's no any, if you say you have left lumbar region pain, they know exactly where that is. Here is the umbilical region, or the umbilical. You've even heard it called that. Here in the middle, it says part of the small intestine. Left and right lumbar regions. In our notes says large intestine, small intestine, left and right kidneys are found in those areas. Hypogastric. Hypo means below. Gastric's talking about the stomach, so you're talking about this lower area where the pelvic region is. And on the sides of the abdomen, they're called the left and right iliac region, which are the sides of the abdomen. Okay. You can also separate the abdomen into 4 quadrants. The LUQ, or left upper quadrant. The RUQ, or right upper quadrant. The LLQ, as far as left lower quadrant, and the RLQ, the right lower quadrant. Just basic terms. And what these are overall body regions. Yes, you need to go over these. You have what is called a layman's term and a medical term. See up here, it says celiac refers to head, frontal, forehead, orbitals, the eye cavity. That's probably mostly people know that. Buccal, which is kind of weird, refers to the cheeks, these cheeks, up in the face. Mental is chin, kind of a strange term. Cervical's neck, oral's mouth. Nasal refers to the nose. Otic, another weird term, refers to ears. So here's pectoral, sternal, umbilical or umbilical, inguinal, where I was just talking about the sides of the abdomen, the iliac regions of the abdomen. Abdominal, the front part of where the elbow is called the antecubital. This is antebrachial. Brachial is the arm. Axillary is the armpit, and you have to know all of these. Acromial, which you actually have a bone that's called the acromial process. It's on the scapula. You're talking about the point on the shoulder. Coxal, in fact, the hip bones are called os coxa, so you're talking about that region there. Genital, patellar is the knees. Here is crural, which refers to leg, and this kind of I don't want this to be confusing. Sural, which is back here, is calf area. Crural refers to the whole leg. Tarsal is basically the ankle, the instep. You have pedal, which is foot. Digits, which are the toes and the fingers. Occipital is the back of the head. Acromial, like I was saying, points on the shoulders. Vertebral, this canal, where the spinal cord is, the bones of the spinal cord as well. Brachial is arm. Dorsum would be the back. That's probably common sense there. Cubital is the elbow. The antecubital would be the front of the arm where the elbow is found. Lumbar, sacral, gluteal are the hips. Perineal is kind of personal. It's that little area that's not quite in the front, not quite in the back. Femoral is the thighs. Popliteal is the area behind the knees. Ceral's calf. Crural refers to leg, and plantar is the bottom of the feet. Oops, and there we are. Now, one last thing, and I'm not going to go over all these. You can read. You don't need me to go through and read this list to you. On your, here we go. Prefixes, suffixes. You're going to have these on your first exam. There's about 10 of them. If you learn prefixes, it helps you throughout anatomy huge, because it'll tell you a lot of times what a body part is, or if you don't know what a term means, if you know the prefix suffix, you can figure it out pretty easy. I'll hit some that are just common ones. A and an here kind of mean the same thing. That's without. You just think of anaerobic, without oxygen. Achlorhydria, you don't have to know that word that means low hydrochloric acid. You have to know that A refers to without or not. Acro is extremity. Yeah, adeno is pretty common. That's gland. Arthro refers to joint. And once again, read through all of these. Okay, I'm just going to hit the highlights here. There's a rule: you don't want to make a video too long, and this one's probably going to be about 30 minutes or longer. So you can read through these on your own. Bio refers to life. Once again, biology, study of living things. You don't have to know what biology means. You got to know what bio refers to in regards to life. Cyst refers to bladder. Endo and epi are pretty common. Endo means within, epi means upon. You have an endoneurium, inside lining, separates individual neurons. You have an epineurium, which is on top of the entire nerve on the outside. Homeo and homeo means similar, like homeostasis, but hydro is water, hyper and hypo, above and below, so deficiencies. Infra also means below, so enter is between. Cover that a little bit. Macro is large. Megacolon, probably not a good thing. Bad burrito there, maybe. But yeah, melanin's black. Oligo means few. You have something called an oligodendrocyte, which makes the myelin sheath in the brain and spinal cord. Phlebe refers to vein. You get the idea. These are suffixes, like, for instance, algia refers to pain. Neuralgia is neurology pain. So anything on the end here. Algia refers to pain of whatever the prefix is. Angios, vessel. Here's itis, which refers to inflammation. Lysis is to dissolve. Osis, Pathy's disease. You get the idea. Read through this list. You are going to have some of these on your first exam or quiz. Rhea means flow. Trophy means to nourish. And that's kind of the end. Urea refers to urine, but you get the idea. So just these areas, I can highlight that. So right there, see that? Penia refers to poverty. Thrombocytopenia is not having enough platelets. So penia refers to poverty. You can have, leukopenia, which is a low white blood cell count. But if you learn these, it really will help you throughout your studies and in the allied health field. Okay, guys, that's an introduction to anatomy and physiology. And you can play this video back if you wish, to your heart's content. But yeah, you do also, and before I leave this, I'm going to go back to our page. This is our course page under number 1. Down here it says quiz number 1. This is a review. And it's a PDF. I kind of need to make that a Word document. But here's the introductory stuff we just went over. The only thing that I will say, this says the 10 characteristics of life. Our new book only has it as 7. The things we went over, it was like excretion, responsiveness, growth, cell respiration, all those things. But everything else, see, here's homeostasis, homeostasis, levels of organization, anatomical position, the terms pertaining to anatomy, directional terms, superior, inferior, body cavities, anything within that outline. And then this will be good. We'll go over that in class, the biological chemistry stuff. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and study hard.